So, you might have seen a recent ceasefire announcement from Donald Trump and thought, okay, a policy move. But what if I told you that according to one specific analysis, it was something much, much bigger, that it was actually a civilizational gamble? We're going to break down what that means, and it all kicks off with this pretty dramatic social media post. And there it is. Now, the analysis we're diving into sees this post as way more than just a tweet. It's the opening shot in a massive strategic play. I mean, listen to that language. Chose civilization, golden age. That's not your standard diplomatic talk. It suggests a huge shift away from decades of foreign policy. So what does this interpretation claim is really happening here?
And that's the million-dollar question we're tackling today. Civilizational gamble. Wow, that's a heavy term, right? It implies the stakes are basically, well, everything, the future of how we all live. And to really get what they mean, we first have to understand the historical framework this whole idea is built on.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What exactly is a civilizational gamble? According to this source, the whole concept is rooted in a very specific view of history, and a system it calls the Imperial Great Game. So the core idea here is that for more than a century, the chaos we've seen in the Middle East wasn't an accident. It was supposedly by design. This analysis argues there's an imperial system that actually benefits from keeping nations at each other's throats, Sunni against Shia, Arab against Jew, all to stop any single regional power from getting too strong, and to make sure outside forces stay in control.
And in this so-called great game, Iran is presented as a crucial piece on the board. The analysis lays out this specific version of history. You have the 1953 coup that stopped Iran's own development in its tracks. Then, a weird pivot in the 70s, where it claims the system actually favored religious extremism over the Shah's modernization plans. All of that, they say, sets the stage for right now, what's being called the first real chance in almost 50 years for Iran to just step off the chessboard completely.
Okay, so with all that context, let's look at the actual ceasefire. Because according to this viewpoint, it's not just another negotiation. It's a direct challenge to that entire old imperial system. So here's where it gets really interesting. According to the source, the crucial detail isn't just the ceasefire itself, it's how it was presented. Trump announces a mutual 2-week pause, says all military goals are met, fine. But then he does something really unusual. He shares Iran's own official statement confirming it. The interpretation here is that this wasn't about beating an enemy into submission, it was about acknowledging a partner choosing a new direction. And this really lays out the two doors Iran is supposedly facing. Door number one, from what the source calls the war party, is the Libya model. Give up your weapons now and just hope you don't get overthrown later. But door number two is presented as Trump's offer, a civilizational choice. It's not about surrender, it's about rejoining the world through peace and development. Now, to illustrate the opposition to this new path, the source points to figures like Senator Lindsey Graham. It frames his call for a congressional review as an attempt to hit the brakes, to slow things down, and pull the whole process back into the old way of doing things, where the traditional political machine stays in control. Now, this is fascinating. The source argues the real game changer here is who is at the negotiating table, and more importantly, who isn't. It claims that regional powers, Pakistan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, are the ones taking the lead. And who's been left out in the cold? The traditional managers of the great game. NATO, European institutions, and get this, even the British financial system, represented by Lloyd's of London. This is being painted as a total bypass of the old guard. Now, to really understand why this analysis calls the ceasefire a civilizational move, we have to look past the geopolitics for a second. The source argues this is just one battle in a much larger ideological war against a very specific kind of enemy that it labels the nihilists. And the analysis connects everything happening in the Middle East to this speech by Vice President J.D. Vance in Budapest. It presents this quote as proof that the fight is about something way more fundamental than policy. Vance isn't talking about economics or military alliances. He's framing things as a moral cooperation for the defense of Western civilization. So who exactly is this enemy? The source hones in on Vance's word, nihilists. It defines this as a worldview that sees no higher purpose in anything, no universal truth. All that exists is power and the rules you use to wield it. This, the analysis claims, is the core belief of that imperial system, just with the mask pulled off. So, if you're fighting against nihilists, what are you fighting for? Well, the source lists what it calls civilizational goods that Vance talked about. We're talking about big concepts here, like sovereignty, prosperity, having a connection to your own history, a sense of community, and the value of family. These are presented as the positive, meaningful ideas that the so-called nihilistic system wants to tear down. And to show this isn't just an American issue, the analysis pulls in Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. By quoting him calling his opponent's ideology equal to suicide, the source connects the dots between political fights in Europe and the ideological struggle it sees in the US. It's framing them as two fronts in the exact same war. So if the enemy is nihilism, this idea of believing in nothing, what's the alternative? What's the positive vision? Well, the analysis points to one final piece of evidence it says offers a clear, aspirational future, designed as the ultimate antidote. At the same time the Iran deal was unfolding, the source highlights a call Trump made to the Artemis 2 astronauts circling the moon. And it presents this quote not just as a comment about space, but as a metaphor for an optimistic, ambitious vision for humanity's future. It's a direct challenge to the managed decline it accuses the nihilists of pushing. And this slide just puts that contrast into the starkest possible terms. On one side, you have what the source calls the empire's vision, a future that sounds pretty dystopian, living in a tiny apartment, owning nothing, just renting everything. And on the other side, you have the civilizational vision, one of boundless potential, with humanity expanding out to the moon and Mars. The analysis then offers this little anecdote as proof that this bigger vision has a powerful appeal. It points out that a Canadian astronaut on that very mission praised American leadership for setting these huge goals for all of humanity. This is used to suggest that the civilizational vision is inspiring allies, even when their own governments are part of that old rules-based order. All right, let's pull all three of these threads together, because according to this analysis, these aren't just three separate events happening at the same time. They're a coordinated push on three different fronts. And this is the whole argument in a nutshell. The source sees a three-front gamble. First, there's the diplomatic front in Tehran, which challenges the old imperial great game. Second, the ideological front in Budapest, which defines and confronts nihilism. And third, the inspirational front up there in lunar orbit, which offers a grander vision for our future. And so, the picture this analysis paints is one of a massive, almost ultimate choice. It's not about left versus right in the way we usually think about it. It's about two fundamentally different paths forward for the entire world. Ultimately, what we've done here is map out a very specific worldview. It's one that frames global events not as a series of random crises, but as a deliberate choice between what it calls a declining empire and a civilizational rebirth. So the final question is really for you. What does viewing the world through this particular lens reveal about the moment we're all living in?